Hi, and welcome to Drawing with Steffi. Today we are going to do a tutorial demo on how to use the program called Paint Tool Sci. It's a really great program. It's a little bit like Photoshop, but it doesn't have as many editing features, so you can't use things like gradients. There aren't as many layer types. But it's a really great program for painting and drawing and sketching. It's what I use when I do my sketch drawing tutorials. As usual, if you want to see more of my demos or just my art in general, you can check out my DeviantArt account at lady-cybercat.deviantart.com. So let's get started here. That's something I drew that will be helpful in a moment, but first I just want to show you some of the tools that Sci has. You can get more brushes. As you can see, I've got quite a few here at the Sci website. Also, DeviantArt has a couple that you can download that are pretty nifty. I'm just going to start with some of the basics. Like Photoshop, it has layers. So right over here are some of your layer tools. This is like new layer. This is vector layer, which we'll go over. This is groups, just like you can have groups in Photoshop. That's the trash can. This is erase the layer, or clear layer. There's a couple other things here that I don't really use too often. But new layer is fairly awesome and useful, and you'll probably use that a lot. Right now we're on just a normal layer. It does have layer modes just like Photoshop. It just has a lot less. It's got normal, multiply, screen, overlay, luminosity, shade, Lumion shade, and binary colors. I don't really use these last ones. Multiply, screen, and overlay are the most common ones I like to use. They seem to be the most useful. You can save this as a Photoshop file and transport it or import it over to Photoshop, or just save it as the PSD file and open it in Photoshop, and use different layers if styles if you want. But you can't convert it back over. You'd have to flatten those layers and then bring it back over into Sci. I do that a lot when I'm working. If Photoshop has something or can do something better, I'll save it as a Photoshop file and put it into that program and then put it back into Sci to finish drawing. But let's go over here. This over here is the zoom. There's a couple different ways to do the same thing inside, just like in Photoshop. There's an angle. Some of the higher versions of Photoshop have this, where you don't have to actually turn the whole canvas around, but this is really useful. This is my favorite thing about Sci, is you can rotate the canvas without having to get the computer to process turning it around. Makes it really easy to draw. Over here is your colors, the color wheel. This is not really a swatch like in Photoshop. You can choose colors, but you can't save it, so once you get rid of all these, you can't save them, unfortunately. That's kind of a bit of a bummer. Of course, that's a selection tool and a lasso tool and a magic wand. They work pretty much the same as they do in Photoshop. You can select something. You can copy it and save it, or paste it, whatnot. There's a lasso. There's really not a whole lot of things you can do with these. You can't alter them very much, because again, this is not really an editing program like Photoshop. It's more drawing. This is to move things around. Of course, then there's the magnifying glass, make it bigger, smaller. The grab tool helps you move things around on your canvas, or at least can't move the canvas around. That's an ink dropper, so you can sample things. Alright, let's start with the pen, and this is the color we're using right now. And as you can see, it draws really nice lines. This is the stabilization. This is one of the really awesome things about Sci. When it's on 0, see, it's a little bit more wonky, and it moves around the page really fast. This is great if you want to sketch, because it means you can get the lines down nice and fast and there's no delay or lag. But say you want to ink something and you don't want to have to zoom in really super close and go really slow, you can use the stabilization. And this helps keep your line from getting those annoying little wibbles in it and those little wiggles. And it's not so good for sketching, but it's great for inking. And it can really increase the speed of you inking your picture. There are lots of different settings. You'll just have to find the one you like the most. I usually ink on S4. That seems to be the one that works best for me. Right, the pen. It's just your generic brush. Great for sketching. You can do like cell shade style coloring with it. There's also different nib tips. This is the hard one, so it's got the most crisp edges. This is the one I like to use a lot because it's a little softer. You can't really see too much of a difference unless you get up really close. But it looks a little softer. This one's really soft, so you can definitely start seeing how it's fuzzy along the edges. And this one's almost like using an airbrush. It gets really fuzzy. Again, just like in most other painting programs, you have how big the brush is. You also have your minimum size. This is how big the line will start when you first start drawing. I keep it fairly thin, so it starts just like when you're using a pencil, unless you press really hard and then it gets nice and fat. There are lots of toggles and widgets that you can use to manipulate how your lines look, like down here where it says hard, soft. If it's really, really hard, it means you have to put a lot of pressure on your tablet. Again, you do have to have a tablet really if you're going to use SI. You could use a mouse theoretically, but you're not going to have the benefits of the pressure sensitivity. Let's see, and if I want it softer, it means I don't have to press very much at all for it to get nice and fat. So just depending upon what tool you're using, you can decide how hard or soft you want your tablet to react. When I'm sketching, I like it fairly hard because I don't want it to be fat. Of course, there's an airbrush, and it makes it nice and fuzzy. I don't use that too often, but it can be fairly useful. There's no gradient tool in SI, so this is another good way to get kind of a gradient. That's something you'd probably definitely want on the soft setting. Then there's just the paintbrush. The paintbrush is one of the more versatile tools in SI. It can let you do some really nifty things. Unlike Photoshop, or at least some of the lower versions of Photoshop, this one will let you kind of pick up the colors that are around it and smear them around depending upon how you have your toggles set. Like blending here will let you blend the colors. Depending upon how high you have it, you can zoom in a little closer so you can see better. It will really blend those two colors together. Let's get some yellow in there. So you can barely see the yellow because I have the blending set so high, but if I put it lower, the yellow will show up a little bit better. Dilution is another way to blend. It doesn't do so much color on top of color, but when you color on top of nothing, so basically this layer around here is not really white. Unlike Photoshop, when you first start out, there's really nothing underneath the layer. It just shows up white so you can see. It doesn't do that little checkerboard thing. But if you have a high dilution, it's kind of like, think of it using like watercolors and a lot of water. And this is a great way to shade or to mix your colors around. It's pretty groovy. Less dilution means the color will be truer, but this is a great way to shade. If you have like a kind of a flat color underneath, you can make a new layer, and you don't even have to set it to multiply because whatever you have on top is going to show through. But if I put it to dilution, see how it dilutes the color there, and you can kind of shade like that. You could set it to multiply, and you'll still have that nifty shade. So that's a great way to shade. And if that's getting just a little bit too, if there's kind of streaks in there, you can either like reduce the density, and that will help make it a little softer so there's not quite so many lines, or you can use the water brush. Water brush is really good for blending. It also uses the same toggles: blending, dilution, and persistence. Persistence is kind of like how long the color will stay true to itself. I don't use that too often, but there are a lot of settings where it's pretty nifty. Again, if you're just coloring by itself and you don't have any of the toggles set, it'll work just like the paintbrush. And again, you can use the different tips. I like putting it on the middle there. But if I go to dilution, it will help, shade or smear. It's kind of like the smudge brush in Photoshop, but it doesn't take so long for your computer to think about it. Sai is really good in that it does not make your hard drive or your computer think too hard. It's really low resource. And of course there's the blending setting. And of course if there's nothing on top of it, it's not going to blend very well, but on top, there you go. There you go. Let me go back down here so you can see how it really blends around. So there's just lots of things you can do. You just have to play around with the toggles. They come with basic settings that I've messed around with, so they haven't reverted. If you mess up your settings and you want them to go back to the way they were, what you can do is you can go to a blank spot here and right click and just tell it the type of brush you want, and it will bring it back up at its original settings, like watercolor. There you go. You can also cancel that out or delete it, so you won't ever lose it. I also have a list of the settings on my DeviantArt account, so you can just visit Lady-Cybercat to get the original settings for all the brushes. Or if you can't find them to download, you can just make new brushes and get the settings. Let's see. One of the other nifty things about Sai is the vector tools. That's what this little brush here is, or this little icon. It says New Line Work Layer. This works kind of like the line tool in Photoshop, but it's so much easier to use. It's also like what you'll find in Illustrator. Unfortunately, you can't import it to Illustrator. It can only save as a PSD file, and once you've done that, it converts it. But you can save it as a Sai file and continue to mess with it. But there are a couple of different tools in the vector. Again, you can use the stabilization feature and you can make nice lines. But then you can move them around. So if you have something you don't quite like that line there, you can take the edit and move it around. This is great if you want really clean inking and things don't get quite where you want them to. You can just move them around. There's a curve tool. You have to click your stylus against the tablet to get the spot to appear, and you hit the escape key to turn off the line. But again, you can move it around then with the edit tool. But this can be really, really useful. And another nifty thing is the pressure. Say you want some line weight, and you just basically grab onto the little dot and then you move it right or left or up or down, and it will make the line thinner or thicker. It won't only go so thick, unfortunately, but it can still be pretty nifty. See, make it nice and fat. Or you can make it really thin. Something else you can do is you can add lines. Like if you use the edit key, you just click on a spot you want there to be a line, and then you can move it. So if there's no dot where you want it to be, just click on it, and there you go. Or I guess you just stab at your tablet. There you go. That can be pretty awesome. Let me get rid of this. Alright. I'll just show you how I do some coloring to give you some ideas. Basically what you have to do with size is just play around with it a lot. The more you play around with it, the better you'll get at it. It's like anything else. This is some line work that I did a couple years ago. It's done in pencil. I may have inked it. But this was not drawn in Sai. That was hand drawn and inked. But I'll show you some nifty things you can do. Mess around with the layers. I'm going to put that on top with the multiply setting, and I'm going to color underneath it. Again, it doesn't work the same way that Photoshop does. It doesn't have the nifty toggles for like the lasso, like a magnetic lasso. You just have to be careful about what you do. I don't really use the lasso very often because there's no toggle for it. It's kind of hard to do all those lines, but it has it there in case you ever want to use it. There's also the menus up here that you can play with. It does have some filters, not a whole lot, as you can see. There's a couple, layer info things like, squishing it down, the merge visible. You can flip it around. I use the flip horizontal and flip vertical a lot when I'm drawing. Alright, coloring. Let's do a nice kind of minty green here. I'm going to usually use the brush, and I'm just going to use normal density because I don't want it to be, a nice flat color. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And again, I don't have blending, dilution, or persistence. Whoops, let me turn off the stabilization because that slows your cursor down, and I don't want to do that right now. I'm not going to color the whole fairy because I just want to give you a couple of different ideas on how you can color with Psy. Scoot out a little bit more. I'm just going to color that in. What you can do sometimes if you want to go real fast is kind of outline the area you want colored. And then come in with the eraser. Most of these brushes are self-explanatory. You just need to play with them to get an idea on how they work. And then you can use the bucket to fill that in. It doesn't get that little annoying line like it does in Photoshop, which is kind of nice. So it's good for flatting, if you don't mind that there's no lasso tool. There you go. And I'm going to make a layer on top of that, and then I'm going to use the same brush, but I'm going to use it with a high dilution. I'm going to set it to multiply because I'm using the same color. And I'm going to make that a little bit bigger so I don't. And what you can do is also set it to clipping group, which is same kind of as a mask in Photoshop. So now it's only going to color on top of the layer area that was colored previously, which is really handy. I use that a lot. Right, now I'm going to put the dilution even higher, and that way, see how it makes this kind of nice gradation? It's a great way to have a kind of a fading color. But I'm still kind of getting those lines, and if I don't want those lines, I can either go to the water brush and make it even lighter, or I can just back down the intensity of the density and make it a little higher. And see how that fades that out really nice? That's just one way you can color. There are so many different ways. That is one way you can do it. Another way you can, this is more of the demo part. Say if you wanted to be like really painterly, you could have the blending and the dilution set up. I'm going to do kind of a dark blue here. I'm going to merge down those colored layers there. I'm going to bring my density back up all the way. And I can also lock, like with preserve opacity, and again, I can only color in the areas that I've colored before. And I'm going to bring the blending up a little bit and the dilution down a little bit. And see how I'm smearing into the areas I've already been in? I'm going to bring the blending down a little bit more because I want more of the blue to show up. And you just play around with the toggles until you find something that works for what you're wanting to do. And you bring down the density to help with the lines. But see, that makes it, really painterly. Let's bring up a brighter color here. See how it smears, like if I'm putting less pressure on the tablet or the stylus. And you can just color all day long with this way. And sometimes I do. Just go nice and light there. There's so many nifty different tools inside. Let's see here. The marker's pretty cool. Markers works really strange. It's really light. Whoops. Let me get back to the normal simple circle here. Yes, there's lots of different toggles. There's different brush types. I have a ton because I've downloaded a bunch of them. There's less, but there's like flat, and these will work in the paintbrushes too, so you can really get some painterly effect. But I'm just going to use the normal simple circle, just the graphic thing. This is really weird, the way the marker works, but it can be pretty nifty. I think I have it on its generic settings right now. But no matter how hard you color, it's going to be the same density, but when you color on top of it, it gets darker. I've also found that it works differently, like if that was on a blank layer, if I have a slightly colored layer or white, and then I use the marker, it reacts differently. See how it's kind of smeary a little bit? And it reacts really weird. Oops, let me try that again. It reacts really weird depending upon what you're coloring on top of. It's one that I don't use too often, but it's nifty. Let's see here. There's also the ink pen. Oops, that's why I can't see anything. It's on top of something else. Let's try that again. Let's go white. Let's try the marker brush again. Woo. See, that's it on top of like a blank layer. This is on top of a layer that's already technically been colored on. It's weird stuff. Alright, I'm going to smush all this together. Get rid of it. Okay, there we go. It's a little slow. It's because I'm recording. Alright, there's also, let's see here, there's a pencil. Of course, there's different settings for like water. See how it has the blending of a certain thing? There's just all sorts of nifty settings. It looks like it's mostly a blending brush. Yep. And then there's water, oil, a shader, and acrylic. There we go. This shows you some of the brush tips you can get. See how it's that nice graphic. It's also got on the canvas setting. And see how it kind of wiggles around. The way it does its brushes is totally different than how Photoshop does, so making brushes is a little bit more challenging. But it can still do some really cool things. See how it smears a little bit into the paint that's already been there. And let's see, there's, you know, normal like paper, watercolor paper, and that all reacts differently. So that's how it's more like Painter in some ways. Kind of have, let's see, let me make this nice and big so you can see it. This one is, see, it's smearing into what's already there. That has a paper setting. I've got a crayon. Yeah, that's one of the really neat settings, is when it has that wiggly thing in there. Makes for good textures. There's a little bit of a crackle. I have an airbrush. There's all just sorts of settings and brushes you can get. But let's see here. Got charcoal tip. Let's see, get that nice and big. And this little thing here is how you control how much the texture shows up. This little toggle right here. And let me see here. Let me take back the blending so you can see a little bit better. That's charcoal. Got some cross hatching. Some ice. Let's see. Oops. Trying to show you some really different ones. Let's see. And if you make it really, really obvious. There we go. So there's some nifty textures you can get with Sai. I use them sometimes. And of course then there's the brush settings. You can get it really nice and streaky. Clear this out. Just have to play around with the various different types and mess around with it and see how you like it. That made the bristles really nice and thick. Let's see, there's also a leaf brush I tried to make. As you can see, it doesn't work the same way that Photoshop does. It kind of smears things out. There's really no way to change it how it draws the brush. But there's some really great things with Sai. Let me get this back on the simple circle. Let's see. And again, this is my favorite thing, turning it around. Of course, there's the grab, which helps move around your canvas, and the ink drop, so you can get your colors right the way you want them to. If you want to add things to your swatch, right here, you just right-click and hit Set. To get rid of it, you just hit, same thing, hit Remove. There are just tons of nifty things you can do with Sai. I definitely encourage you to try it. It's just an awesome program. If you have other questions, feel free to drop me a message here on YouTube or on DeviantArt, or you can email me at cybercatgraphics@yahoo.com. I'll do another tutorial where I color something all the way just to show you some more techniques that you can use. And I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.